Welcome to the talk show where men unite, having conversations that inspire, ignite. From relationships to wellness, we cover it all. In this positive space, we're standing tall. We're the men of the talk show, spreading good vibes.
All right, welcome back to the Men's Talk Show, episode 4, season 3. We are very happy to have Volker with us today. He actually has his own podcast called Man Up, Man Down. So I'm very excited to have him today. Volker, how's your week been going? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into basically, how you became the man you are today.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be with you today. So a bit about myself. Where do I start? So I'm originally German. That's why I have the most non-international name ever. So my parents gave me a very traditional German name, but I moved to the UK, or actually, since you're based in the States, I actually moved to the US when I was 16 actually, I think. And I did an exchange year in Kansas, of all places. So I spent a year in the US, then moved back to Germany, and then I finished my studies actually in Scotland. And then I moved from Scotland down to England. So I've been in the UK now since 2001. So I'm living in an English-speaking world for most part of my life now. The majority of my life I spent in English-speaking countries. So there we are. So I'm based just south of London. I used to live in London, but I moved the family out. I have married to a Scottish lady and have 2 boys. So 2 men almost. So they're 14 and coming up for 16.
All right, let's get right into it. So let's talk a little bit about have you had any mental health journey breakthroughs or anything that you want to share with the audience to give a little backstory before we get into how you became the man you are today? Have you gone to therapy? What was your mental health journeys like, basically?
Yeah, so I've been very lucky. So I haven't, if I say I have never had any mental health issues, that would be lying, right?
Yes.
We all have had our own issues. But I've always been very interested in personal development. So I'm working as a coach. So if I say my journey has always been to how can I better myself? So I've got involved with NLP early on at university. And I did my master practitioner in NLP in 2003. So that was a bit of therapy there already. So for anyone who's not familiar with neuro-linguistic programming, it's actually something that the founders took from therapy. They took the best parts of therapy in the 70s. So they took Gestalt and hypnosis and so on and took it out and called it NLP. And now, funny enough, so I'm a trained therapist. So doing my therapy training, it came back as a methodology essentially within therapy as well. So NLP is all encompassing. But I have gone through 7 redundancies in my corporate career. And during that time, I think if I hadn't had a mindfulness practice, in particular meditation, I don't think I would be the man I am today. Because if I say it helped me to increase my self-awareness, to stay stable, to stay grounded, really. So I've been a meditation practitioner now for over 20 years. And I think without that, I would have had more mental health issues than I've had. As part of my therapy, I have gone to therapy and I'm going through therapy. And I always say, and I would say that as a therapist and coach, every man, every woman needs a therapist and a coach by their side, right? They fulfill 2 different roles. So I can, for one person, I can only ever be the coach or the therapist. But I try to combine as much as possible with some of my clients because there's obviously an overlap.
What I was going to ask you a little bit about, since you say you are a meditation practitioner, what are some of the commonalities that you see among your patients? Actually naming the names, just some of the things that you see, like depression, suicidal ideation. What are some of the common patterns that you see that they come in and help you? Or is it not even related to, it's just more calming them down?
If I say it depends, right? So I wouldn't say there's just one theme because I don't necessarily specialize in one theme. A lot of it is anxiety, though, I'd say. Anxiety stemming from trauma, right? And childhood. That's what you see in therapy. But obviously that's a very broad stroke, right? Because
Mhm.
most of our issues originate somewhere in childhood, right? And in therapy, we look back, right? We're looking back at our childhood and we look at what's our relationship to our parents. Usually, there's a poem by trying to remember his name, Larkin is his last name, and it starts, "They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They don't mean to, but they do." And that's, if I say, sums it up, right? Whatever faults we got, usually we got from our parents. But our parents didn't mean to do that. Most of our parents didn't mean to do that, I shall say. And that's where therapy comes in, right? And can result in anxiety. It's usually anxiety. It's maybe eating disorder. It can come out in all kind of different shapes and forms. And working with that usually involves going back in time. And I'm a big fan of regression therapy, so timeline therapy, where you take people under hypnosis back to a place in the past to actually analyze what was going on back then and what does it look like now. So it's a bit of combination of Gestalt and hypnosis. So something I enjoy doing, but then again, it's never about me. It's always about the client.
How long have you been doing the meditation practitioner?
So meditation, I started in 2006, actually. So in 2006, I started joining a Buddhist organization in central London, and they had an evening meditation class. And I met a monk there, a Buddhist monk who had a big influence on me. And we used to write a blog. We're going back to the early noughties, right? In terms of blog writing was still cool, right? Otherwise, we would have had a podcast maybe. And we wrote a blog about Buddhism and how that influenced my life, because my life was different to his life, right? If I say on the upward trajectory of my career, and I had all to give for, and used, if I say the reason I got into meditation originally was I liked the 5 a.m. routine. I liked the concept of a 5 a.m. routine. And I wrote a book about productivity as well. I later on then wrote a book about success, so I should talk about that at some point as well. So I wrote a book on the back of my first podcast, which was called Stories of Success. I wrote a book, Principles of Success. And one of the success principles for me was always the 5 a.m. routine. And it was so overhyped, if you ask me. So you would have all heard of Robert or Robin Sharma talking about that's a holy grail, the 5 a.m. routine. And I thought that at some point. So I started a 5 a.m. routine because my kids were quite little at the time. And this is the time I have to meditate. This is a time for myself to journal. This is a time to exercise, because as the day goes on, you get tired. You don't want to go to the gym in the evening, etc. And basically, I started that 5 a.m. routine. And if I say I never looked back, but I've always been an early bird. And for a lot of people, the 5 a.m. routine will never work because it's far too early. They go to bed really late. They're night owls. But what I always say is my 5 a.m. routine could be your 10 a.m. routine. It could be your 12 p.m. routine, whatever you do. But the idea is to get what you want to get done early in the morning, right? Get your gym out of the way, right? So tick that box. Meditate, journal, prepare your day, ground yourself, do some reading, just win, have a win. And if I say the rest of the day then just flows from there. So I started that at the same time, and I now meditate every morning for 20 minutes. And that's my grounding exercise. That's me preparing myself for the day ahead, basically.
And I think that has worked well for your mental health journey. So now I want to go back a little bit. I know you said that I have had a lot of mental health, crises or something like that. But when did you notice that you're starting to maybe notice that you needed therapy, or you needed to come up with coping mechanisms to cope with life stresses?
Good question. I think it's a really difficult question to answer because I never acted on it.
Okay.
But if I'm looking back into, if I say my first years at uni, or even when I was in the Navy, so I did military service in Germany straight after my A levels, so after high school.
Mm-hmm.
So if I look back then, I had a great physiotherapist, and she said, Volker, you're hunching over, right? You have your hands in your pockets. Your body pretty much tells you you're all curled in. And I was smoking about 60 cigarettes a day. So
Wow.
there's a lot. So to ask you the question, right? If someone smokes 60 cigarettes a day and walks all curled up, I think there's something wrong with that person, right? But I never felt like, oh, I needed therapy. And I deliberately say that because that's the theme of our podcast as well, right? We were always taught as men to man up, right? And I thought, oh, I'm invincible, right? I can smoke 60 cigarettes a day. I'm not going to get cancer, right? I'm not going to get ill. Nothing's ever going to happen to me, right? I'm born to be, I don't know, the next hero or whatever, right? The next CEO of Daimler Chrysler or whatever it is. And so it never crossed my mind, if I say to get therapy. But then don't forget, we're talking the late or mid 1990s, right? Not many people, at least not in Germany, would have gone like, oh, I need a therapist. Because it wasn't a day where you go, oh, what's wrong, Volker? Are you okay? Have you ever thought of seeing a therapist? Even if you think there's nothing wrong, it could actually help you, right? So it was something we wouldn't have talked about in the mid 90s, right? It just wasn't there. And I think that has changed. So if you fast forward to today, if I saw someone like me back then, I would have gone like, no, wait, why don't you talk to a therapist, right? And I actually had therapy. If I say I keep forgetting it, it was more because I was curious. I had therapy, I think in 1997, 1998. So I did a family constellation with Hellinger Family Therapy. And I found that very interesting. And hindsight, I probably should have started studying psychology then, but I was on the trajectory to become an engineer. So I did my engineering degree, which I finished. But so it probably goes back to the 1990s. And I think if you compare that to, if I say a timeline for most people, you leave your home, you leave your house, you get independent from your parents, right? You get into a new environment. In my case, I started studying, other people start working straight away, right? And I think that's when you start finding yourself. And if you don't have the right support network, and I was very lucky to have a really good support network, but if you don't, you feel a bit lost and you feel a bit maybe out of sync. You smoke too much, right? Or you might notice, I drink too much, right? As students, you normally drink a lot more than you do nowadays. But there are elements where, if I say a lot more self-awareness, which I probably didn't have at the time, quite frankly, would have gone a long way to say, oh, actually, it will help me to talk to someone. And I think the means are there now. At university, you get more support. In general, men talk more about mental health. And that's where, our podcast comes in as well, as we focus more on middle-aged people.
I was going to ask you about the podcast as well,
Yeah.
too. What it's about, what type of topics you talk about, and how people can reach out to you, too, if they are interested in becoming guests as well, too.
No, it's very good timing as well, because so David is my co-host. We got to know each other during COVID, and we realized there's not really a podcast out there that covers the midlife. So we both realized we had the same issues. We just both got a dog. We both had teenage children. He suffers from some mental health issues. I started my journey as a therapist. So there were lots of similarities. And we said, why don't we do podcasts together? I just finished my podcast on success. As I say, I wrote a book on the back of it. So it came to a natural close. Having said that, I'm actually relaunching that podcast. Someone else is taking it over from March 2025. And David and I got along well. So we started and said, why don't we talk about all these topics men don't talk about? And being a man in your midlife as well, Darren, right? We men don't talk about anything in midlife, right? We just don't talk enough. And so topics we started having on there are, as I say, puppy love, teenage children, mental health, particular ADHD, neurodiversity, and then erectile dysfunction, sex in middle age. We talked a lot about testosterone recently. We talked about alcohol and addiction. We talk about sleep, financial planning. So all these topics that when you get to middle age, where you go, what about my mental health? What about transitioning my life, right? It's more of a transitioning phase. I went self-employed in my middle age. So in 2019, I decided to be self-employed and work as a sales coach, sales consultant, and executive coach, right? And now I work as a therapist on top of that. So I'm trying to give back to people and help people. And a lot of my clients are middle-aged men that go through the same phase, right? We're still looking for someone who wants to talk about divorce, right? Because again, it's very, very common that men in the Middle Ages go through divorce because we start finding ourselves, right? It's similar to what I said. Straight after your high school or A levels, you go into this finding phase. What do you want to do with your life? And then you get to your midlife and you go, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? Chip Conley, which I'm sure most US listeners, and I'm sure you're familiar with Chip Conley, and we booked him in to come on our podcast as well. He talks about the Elder Academy, how much you can do with midlife and older. And Jerry Colonna was on our podcast as well, who talks a lot about that heritage and the responsibility we carry. And for a lot of middle-aged men, this is a huge challenge, right? To go out there and say, oh, actually, there's a lot of responsibility, financial responsibility. Will I have enough to feed my pension? What if I get ill? What if I get cancer? We talked about prostate cancer, which is so common in men, right? Ian Saunders talked about that. There's so many topics. And of course, mental health. We don't talk about men's mental health enough at all. We had Anita Malster on the podcast twice now talking about the vilification of men, how men are actually disadvantaged in society because the pendulum swings too much towards female support. And don't get me wrong, it's great that we support females because for hundreds of years we have been dominating, men have been dominating top jobs. But
that's why men's mental health matters, because a lot of times people disregard and they want to only talk about the women's, and maybe even sometime I have had guests on here where they told me that their partner was not really supportive of them. So that's why we created this safe space for men to come on here and to talk about all of the issues that's on their mind or whatever they want to talk about, because in today's society, I feel like it's going to move, like the pendulum is going to move towards men. I feel like in terms of understanding men's mental health too, because while he says great that women are getting support, but men need support. And when you think about it, I talked to another guest that's going to be coming on in another few weeks, and he's from India. And he said, and you would not believe that India is the highest rated suicide among men.
Wow.
I can't believe that. I didn't even know that statistic. And it's sad when you think about that. You would think that they're low budget, they're really calm in demeanor. I never knew that was the statistic. But when I look at all of these countries, men are suffering from all parts of life. So that's why we wanted to come on here. And we want to get men from all aspects of life: Sweden, Australia, New Zealand, just talk to men of all around the world. And it's really important of the work that you're doing as well too, by putting out your podcast and being able to explain. But we're coming up on time here. But I do thank you though for your some of your expertise. But I do have one more question for you to cut out here. If you can give men one piece of advice, what would you give them?
That's a difficult one. I don't think there's just one piece of advice for any man, right? But I think if I had to summarize it, that's what I say and do in my coaching, right? Is the life you want to be living, right? Go out there and become the man you want to be, not the man you think you should be, right? So if I say rid yourself of what other people told you, tell you who you should be, but go out there and be you, right? If you can't figure out what that you is, and you're in midlife, or if you're younger or you're older, go out there and find out. Speak to a therapist, speak to a coach, self-development books, to your podcast, and thank you so much for creating that space. I think it's so important for men to open up and talk. And as you say, the suicide rate in middle-aged men, 43 is the average age, and I'm not surprised that in India, if that's a high suicide rate, I bet people don't talk about it enough in India yet either. And I think that's what we need to change, right? So the more people like yourself can create these spaces, I think the better it is.
Yes, I totally agree with that, Volker. I really do appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you.
I will put the links in the description so where people can find you in case they ever want to come on and talk to you. I have a lot of men that's really suffering in silence, and we got to create as many podcasts, talk shows as they can, so men don't feel like they're alone. But where can they find you? If you have a website, just go ahead and say it.
Yeah, so easiest to find me is it's always on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, Volker Balüder. There are not many Volker Balüders out there. My company is called Obnatus, so that's obnat.us. And our podcast is called Men Up, Men Down. So just look it up on Spotify. And we're looking for
On
US.
YouTube.
Yeah, we have on YouTube as well. So Instagram, on LinkedIn. So you find us everywhere, but it's called menupdown.com and in the UL. And for anyone listening in the US, we're looking for guests in the US actually to come on our podcast to talk about midlife and middle-aged men. So if you have an interesting topic, reach out to us. Podcast at menupdown.com.
Welcome to the talk show where men unite, having conversations that inspire, ignite. From relationships to wellness, we cover it all. In this positive space, we're standing tall. We're the men of the talk show, spreading good